Hey, I'm Beyun, and today we're going to dive deep into pattern writing with the RE-303. Just so you have some background, the RE-303 is made by DynSync and is a replica, not a clone, of the original Roland TB-303. You can get the RE-303 made or make it yourself with a variety of different CPU options, each with their own set of behaviors. I don't want to get into specifics here, but just so you know, this RE is using the Sonic Potions CPU. Alright, let's get started. Let's first get acquainted with the basics of the RE-303's interface. Every 303 or clone or replica has 4 modes: track write, track play, and pattern write. For the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to stick mainly to the pattern write mode. Over here we have the track and pattern group selector. The highlighted numbers 1 through 7 correspond to the track number. The Roman numerals 1 through 4 correspond to the pattern group. Note that if I turn the knob to track number 1 or 2, I'm still in pattern group 1. Same with 3 and 4. I'm in pattern group 2. The grouping of patterns and track numbers is very important when you're writing tracks on the 303, but we're not going to dive into that today. Let's select pattern group 1. Down here we have our sequencer and keyboard all in one. In the default mode, the normal mode, each button in the bottom row corresponds to a pattern memory slot. For each pattern group, we have 16 available memory slots for patterns. There are 8 slots here in pattern section A, and then you can switch to pattern section B for another 8 slots. To play a pattern, you select your memory slot. In this case, I'm selecting section A and pattern 1, and then hit run. You can adjust the tempo of the pattern manually up here. But later on in this tutorial, I'm going to trigger the 303 using an external MIDI clock, so it syncs up with my other gear. You can also switch patterns and jump to different pages or groups, all while the 303 is running. Notice that when I switch to pattern section B, nothing is playing on any of these memory slots. That's because there's no information in these slots just yet. There are 3 primary modes for the 303. Normal mode, which we're in right now, as you can see, the normal mode LED is lit. Pitch mode, which you can enter by pressing the pitch button. Time mode, and then you can exit any of these modes by pressing the function button. Now we're back in normal mode. Let's start our work in pattern section B, since I'm not using any of those patterns. Each pattern is composed of 3 different parts. The time information, which determine whether each step is a solid note, an open note, or a rest. The pitch information, which determines what notes are played, whether they're pitched up, down, or remain neutral, and whether they have an accent or a slide. And lastly, the number of steps in the sequence, which we can see by holding down the function button. This pattern here already has 16 steps set. The C# and the D# LEDs correspond to page 1 and 2, while the bottom row of LEDs correspond to the steps on that page. Since D# is lit, we are on page 2. And since LED 8 is lit, we are on the 8th step of page 2, meaning that all 16 steps are active. To clear a pattern and start fresh, we hold down pattern clear and the pattern number. This removes both the time and pitch information but leaves the number of steps. You can also clear only pitch information by holding down pattern clear, pitch, and the pattern number. Or you can clear only time information by holding down clear, time, and the pattern number. So fun fact, on the original TB-303 you could only ever erase the time information, but the pitch information would remain until you overwrote each note individually. I believe it's because the data for each mode was stored in a different type of memory, one being more permanent than the other one. Now, I've never personally used a TB-303, but I was in close proximity to one. But I learned the hard way that if you unplugged the TB-303 and there were no batteries or they were drained, then all the time information would get wiped, but the pitch information would remain. I'm still really sorry about that mishap, Sneak. Anyway, let's move on. I habitually begin any type of pattern writing by first setting the number of steps in my pattern. If there's only one step in a pattern like this one, the LED will blink super fast, and no matter what you do, it will only play one note repeatedly. That's why you should always get into the habit of first setting the number of steps. We can set the number of steps in a few ways. First, begin by holding down the function button. You can tap down and continue tapping it until you get to the desired pattern length. I believe this is the only way to do it on the original 303. Notice that on the RE, you get a nice indicator on the LEDs of what step you're on. You can also hold down function next to keep increasing the number of steps by 1, or function back to decrease the number of steps by 1. If you tap function accent, you can cut the number of steps in half, and function slide will double the pattern length, maxing out at 16 steps. My preferred method is to enter the pattern length directly. Remember, in step mode, the C-sharp LED corresponds to page 1, and the D-sharp LED corresponds to page 2, while the steps 1 through 8 below indicate the step number on that page. So if I highlight C-sharp and then press 8, then my pattern is only 8 steps long. If I tap D-sharp and then 8, the pattern is 16 steps long. Another thing to note that unless the triplet mode LED is lit, each step corresponds to a 16th note in 4/4 time. While still holding down the function button, if we tap the triplet button, then each step is now a triplet according to 4/4 time signature. I'm going to program a basic chromatic pattern of 16th notes to give you a sonic clue as to what's going on with these triplets. I'm going to do this really fast, so for now, ignore what I'm doing and we'll dive deeper into this later. Here's the pattern of chromatic 16th notes for the full 16 steps. Now let's activate triplet mode. You should hear a little more space in between each note. Also note that when switching from 16th notes to triplets, the pattern cuts off the last 4 notes. That's because polymetrically, 12 triplets fit into 16 16th notes in 4/4 time. We can further extend the pattern to the full 16 steps, all triplets, if we want to get funky with polymeter in our sequencing. But for now, let's set everything to 16th notes for 16 steps. One good way to get started is to use the random pattern generator on the RE-303. This is great if you have writer's block, or if you want to just get a sound right now. Whatever you end up getting, you can always modify, and I highly recommend that. Or you might get lucky and get something great right out of the box. Anyway, generating a random pattern is pretty easy. Select your pattern memory slot, hold down Pattern Clear, and press Accent. Then hit Run, And boom, we have a pattern. You can continue to generate random patterns even while the RE-303 is running. Now let's say you want to fit the notes in a random pattern generator to a particular scale. You can enter scale mode by holding down Function and then hitting Pitch. Let go and we've now entered scale mode, indicated by both the pitch and the normal mode LEDs being lit. To confirm that scale mode is enabled, make sure that the slide LED is lit. You can then select your root note, and then either the minor, the down LED, or the major, the up LED scale of that root note. For other scales, you're on your own. Let's pick F minor. Double check that the scale LED is lit so that we know the scale mode is active, and then exit by pressing Function twice. Let's hit Pattern Clear, Accent, and then run. And here we go. We have a pattern in the key of F minor. All right, let's go back to our chromatic pattern of 16th notes and dive into time mode. We enter time mode by hitting the time mode button, and we know it's active because the time mode LED is lit. As with entering the number of steps, the LEDs on the keyboard now indicate which step we're on in time mode. When C# or page 1 and the first LED are lit, we know that we're at the first step of our sequence. To get information about what's on each step, we hold down Next and keep holding it down as we make changes. For each step in the sequence, one of these 3 LEDs will be lit. Solid indicates the beginning of a new note. Open is a tie and extends the solid note by one more step in the sequence. And rest is silence on that step. Note that if you have an open note after a rest, then it extends the length of that rest by one more step. You can also just add another rest. Go wild. Once you've made your selection and let go of Next, you'll see that you're automatically advanced to the next step. To go back a step, you can hit back. By the way, you don't necessarily need to hold down the Next button as you enter in the time information. You can tap either of these 3 buttons, and the sequencer will automatically advance you to the next step. But I'm going to hold down the Next button as I enter in each step's information, just so you have a better visual of what's on that step. To give you a better idea of what these 3 options do, I'm going to hit Run and change a few steps in real time. On the first step, we have a solid note. Second step, let's make that an open note. Notice now that the first C note in the chromatic sequence lasts a little longer, for a total of an 8th note. Third step, we'll add another open note. Now the first C note is 3 steps long, for a dotted 8th. Fourth step, we'll add yet another open note. Now the first C note is a half note. Fifth step, we'll add a rest. Now there's a pause. Sixth step, we could add an open note, remember, to extend the rest by another step, or add another rest. They both do the same thing, but for our purposes, I'm going to add a solid note. That 7th step, let's add an open note. 8th, I'm going to leave it a solid. 9th, remember, now we're on page 2, the first step, so adding 1 to 8, so we're on 9. 9, I'm going to leave that a solid. 10, let's make that one open. 11, that's going to be rest. a solid, 13, a solid, 14, open, 15, I'll leave that a solid, and 16, let's make that one a rest. Notice that when we enter in the information for the last step in the sequence, it auto-exits out of time mode. Alright, so now we have a chromatic pattern with a more interesting rhythm going. If we stop this, and then start everything with my MIDI clock so that it triggers my TR-08, okay, let's stop the drums. Now notice that where we once had 16 chromatic notes playing, we now only hear 7 of those notes. That's because the number of the notes activated in pitch mode is the number of solid notes specified in time mode, which in this case is 7. To enter pitch mode, hit the pitch button. Like time mode, you know it's active when the pitch LED is lit. As the same with time mode and setting the number of steps, the keyboard in pitch mode now gives us information about where we are in our sequence. But instead of step numbers, it now indicates the note number. If time mode had only solid notes on each step for a full set of 16 16th notes, then each note in this mode would correspond to a step. In this case, our time mode pattern only has 7 solid notes, so only the first 7 notes that we specify in pitch mode will play this pattern. If we hold down Next and keep holding it down, we can view or change our pitch information for that note. We can set the pitch value for that note. We can transpose the pitch down or up, or keep it in the middle by tapping a lit LED again. And then we can give it an accent, meaning that the note will hit just a little bit harder. On the RE or TB, it can produce a nice little twang as if you hit your guitar string with some force. Remember, the original TB-303 was designed to emulate a bass guitar. Now, how hard it hits is determined by how far you set the accent level here. You can hear that the first note now has an accent, and now without. Lastly, we have the lovely slide. This slide is different from the open note in time mode, which extends the note before it and will always keep the same pitch from the solid note before it. When a slide is specified on a note, the 303 will glide or slide the pitch from that note into the next note. Keep in mind that on the RE-303, it doesn't matter if there is a rest in between the 2 notes participating in the slide. But compared to a slide between 2 notes, and a slide between 2 notes with rest in the middle, it will have a slightly different feel. And there's our slide. Without the slide, and with the slide. Now, I've been holding this next button for a really long time, but once I'm happy with my settings for this note and let go, it will advance me to the next note, not step. Remember, we're dealing with notes here. If I want to go back, I can tap back. Now remember, this sequence has 7 notes. So if we set the first 7 notes to C, then C is the only note we'll hear. We can just set the notes directly if we don't want to specify any other information, and it'll advance us in this sequence of notes. So this is note 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. If we try to specify any information on the 8th note, we don't hear any changes because only the first 7 notes count in this pattern. Okay, so let's trigger the drums and start giving these notes some pitches. You can go back to the first note in the pitch sequence by hitting the pitch mode button again. So remember, page 1, note 1. All right, cue the drums. All right, now we have a pattern. Notice that the 7th note slides into the first note, but because the first note has an accent on it and the last note has a rest, it kind of makes that first note still pop, as opposed to a note sliding into another note. Now, between the first note sliding into the second note, there's also a rest, and you can still hear a pop too, unlike a direct note-to-note slide. If I were to take the slide off the 7th note, the final rest would be felt, and the first note would hit even stronger. I'll put that back. Same with taking the slide off the first note. So we have a pattern that kind of works. Let's iterate on it. To copy a pattern, we press pattern clear, C#, and then the pattern number we want to copy from, in this case, 1. To paste that pattern, we press pattern clear again, D sharp, and then the pattern number we want to copy to. So let's say 2 is the one we want to copy to. So here's pattern 1. And then pattern 2. Now with this copied pattern, I can go into pitch mode and make some modifications to the accents or slides. Let's take the slide off the first note. We can then exit pitch mode and switch to pattern play mode. Hold down pattern 1 and then hit pattern 2 to create a pattern chain. Notice that both LEDs light up with the active pattern blinking. If we press play, it will play these patterns in succession. You can create longer pattern chains by holding down the first pattern slot in your chain, and while keeping it held down, hit the final pattern slot in your chain. All patterns in between will light up for a maximum of 8. When you hit play, all of these patterns will play in sequence. There's no information on the other patterns, so it's kind of freaking out. To deactivate the pattern chain, simply hit any pattern number again. Okay, so let's go back into pattern write mode and copy our first pattern. Remember, copy is clear, C sharp, the pattern we want to copy, and then paste, clear, D sharp, the pattern we want to copy too. Okay, so the pattern is copied. Let's play it with the drums. Perhaps I'm not convinced that this pattern is starting on the right note. What if I wanted the pattern to actually start at the 5th step? You can rotate the pattern steps right by hitting clear and up. Or rotate them left with clear and down. Okay, maybe I like this better. But what if I wanted to experiment and shift the pitches around? You can hit clear, pitch, and up, and it will shift the notes right. You can also hit clear, pitch, and down, and it will shift the notes left. I kind of like it shifted one to the right. You can also shift only the time information in a similar way. Clear, time, and up will shift the time info right. And clear, time, and down will shift the time info left. Okay, I kind of like it where it was, so let's leave it there. Alright, so now we have a pattern that kind of works. It probably needs more sonic character with some distortion, reverb, and maybe a little bit of delay, but that's a whole other set of tutorials. There's still one more thing though that we can do in pattern mode. Right now, this pattern is playing forwards. Notice that we're viewing the pattern in normal mode. One thing I didn't mention is while the pattern plays in normal mode, you can see what step is playing as indicated by the number of the LED lit up on the keyboard down here. Remember, C sharp is page 1, and D sharp is page 2, and this row is steps 1 through 8. Now look over here and notice that the up LED is lit. What if we press the down LED? The pattern now plays in reverse. You might have to start and stop the sequence again to make sure the clock didn't get twisted. Unless, of course, you are clever with your timing. I think I was. But I think I'm going to keep the RE-303 playing this pattern forward for now. Wasn't so good with the timing there. Anyway, keep this option in mind when you're brainstorming. It can yield some unexpected results, and it might just work. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button or click subscribe. Also, please check out the releases on my label Vault Wax. Support our artists by heading over to clone.nl to pick up a record or head over to our Bandcamp. The links to both are in the description below. I've also added a link to the manual for the Sonic Potion CPU in case you want to dive a little bit deeper. I promise it's worth it. And if you're curious where I got my RE-303 made, I got mine made by Andreas at Comptronics. The link to his site is also in the description. Please feel free to leave a note in the comments if you have any questions or would like to suggest another 303 related tutorial in the future. Thank you, and until next time.